Britain would win World War II, but in December 1940, Britain had already begun losing something far more dangerous. And it was not losing on the battlefield, it was losing on paper. Because London was dark not only due to blackout rules, but because the future itself looked uncertain. And while German bombers filled the sky, the real explosion had already happened quietly inside Britain's bank vaults, where numbers were collapsing faster than buildings. And although the British Empire still looked massive on world maps with pink stretching across continents, inside the rooms of Whitehall, there was an uneasy silence. A silence filled with fear, because the men running the country knew a truth they dared not share with the public. Britain was running out of money, and while Winston Churchill stood on the radio telling the nation, "We shall never surrender," that same night he was writing a private letter, not to an ally as an equal but to President Franklin Roosevelt as a man asking for help, because the letter carried an admission Britain had never made before, that the empire which once financed the world could no longer afford to defend itself. And this truth felt shocking because only a year earlier, Britain had still been wealthy with gold reserves, overseas investments, and profitable companies across the United States. Yet this war was unlike any before it. It was a total war driven by machines that consumed steel, oil, and money, a pace no economy could easily survive. And Britain had a fatal weakness. It imported almost everything it needed to fight. So when Europe fell under German control and trade routes closed, Britain was forced to look across the Atlantic to the only supplier left, the United States. But America was neutral and its rules were simple: cash and carry, which meant no credit, no delays, and no favors. Every plane, every tank, every bullet had to be paid for in dollars or gold before leaving American ports. And Britain paid. It paid again and again, until the pressure became unbearable. Until one night the British Treasury admitted there was nothing left to give. And that moment shook the foundations of the empire, because in desperation the government made a decision never meant for public eyes: loading Britain's entire gold reserve onto warships under cover of darkness and sending it across the dangerous Atlantic to Canada, a silent escape of national wealth that revealed the truth Britain could no longer hide. This was not strategy, it was survival. And when even the gold was gone, Britain was left with only one thing: hope. And that hope now rested entirely in American hands, because in Washington, British officials sat with unsigned contracts for planes and tanks they desperately needed but could no longer pay for. And it was here that the story took a dangerous turn, because America was willing to help, but only on its own terms, and those terms would soon cost Britain far more than money. Chapter 2. America was willing to help Britain, but help would not come freely. And this was the moment when survival began to carry a price far higher than anyone in London had imagined. Because President Roosevelt needed a solution that looked fair to American voters and safe for American law. So he introduced an idea that sounded simple and generous, something he called Lease, a plan he explained as lending a garden hose to a neighbor whose house was on fire. But behind this friendly story was a far tougher reality, because before a single weapon could be shipped, the United States demanded proof that Britain had nothing left to sell. And that task fell to the American Treasury, where officials asked for full access to Britain's financial records, its overseas companies, its investments, and its income streams. And for the first time in modern history, a global empire was being asked to open its books to another power, not as a partner but as a debtor. And while British negotiators argued that selling long-term assets during a war would permanently damage the nation's future, the American response remained calm and firm. If Britain still owned valuable companies in the United States, then American taxpayers should not be the ones paying Britain's bills. And this logic soon focused on a single symbol: American Viscose Corporation, a highly profitable industrial company owned by British investors, a company that generated steady dollar income and represented Britain's economic future after the war. But American officials insisted it had to be sold. Not later, not slowly, but immediately, because the money from that sale would help pay for existing weapons orders. And under growing pressure and with Lend-Lease still uncertain, Britain had no leverage left. So in March 1940, when the company was sold under emergency conditions, and because everyone knew Britain had to sell, the price was far lower than its true value. And that moment changed how Britain saw the relationship, because it became clear that this was not charity or generosity. It was a transaction shaped by power. And the cost did not stop with factories, because at the same time, Britain was desperate for naval protection as German submarines threatened to cut supply lines across the Atlantic, so Britain asked for destroyers, and America agreed. But again, the deal came with conditions. 50 old American ships were exchanged for long-term access to British naval and air bases across the Atlantic and the Caribbean, giving the United States a strategic presence stretching from Canada to the southern seas. And while the ships helped Britain survive in the short term, the bases reshaped global power in the long term. And by the time Lend-Lease officially passed into law, Britain had secured the weapons it needed. But it had done so by trading away gold, companies, and strategic positions. And although the aid kept Britain fighting, it also revealed a new reality. The center of power was shifting, quietly but permanently, from London to Washington. Chapter 3. Victory without power. Britain finally won the war, and in August 1945 the streets of London filled with celebration, because after years of fear and sacrifice the enemy had surrendered. But while crowds cheered, the financial system holding Britain together was about to be cut loose, because only days after victory the United States made a decision that shocked London. Lend-Lease was ended immediately, without warning and without a transition period, and ships already crossing the Atlantic with food and supplies were ordered to turn back, leaving Britain exposed at the exact moment it needed help the most. And the impact was instant, because Britain still imported much of its food and raw materials and now had no dollars left to pay for them, meaning the country was technically bankrupt the moment the war ended. And with no alternative, Britain returned to Washington once more, not as a wartime ally but as a nation asking for a loan. And the loan was approved, but only with strict conditions that reshaped Britain's future, forcing the pound to become freely convertible and opening British markets to global competition before the economy was ready. And within months Britain's reserves drained again, proving that the empire, which had once financed the world, could no longer control its own currency. And this was the final shift, because while Britain had won the war militarily, the United States had emerged as the world's financial center. And from that moment on, global power spoke in dollars instead of pounds, leaving Britain with victory, but without dominance. If a country can win the biggest war in history and still lose its global power, what does that say about how power really works and who truly controls it today?